Welcome to Twilight Fables, where we tell stories for you to sleep, but tonight, sleep might not come so easily. You remember the tale, don't you? A princess cursed to slumber, a kingdom wrapped in silence, and the promise of true love's kiss. But fairy tales lie, they soften the sharp edges, they bury the rot. So tonight, we invite you to lie back, close your eyes, and listen to the real story of Sleeping Beauty, a tale not of peaceful sleep, but of something much darker that dreams beneath the veil of silence. The kingdom of Veilmoor was shrouded in fog more often than not. The sun, when it pierced the thick blanket of grey, did so with a kind of reluctant grace, as if it feared what it might illuminate below. This land sat at the edge of the known world, cradled between a black forest and an inland sea, where cliffs jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Stories passed through its cobbled streets, like wind, soft at first, then howling. The people of Veilmoor knew to be quiet. They spoke in whispers, walked gently, and never spoke of the tower. No one remembered when the tower was built, but everyone knew not to look at it for too long. It rose like a needle on the far end of the castle grounds, swathed in ivy that never died, even in winter. Birds avoided it, so did the guards, so did the king. Truth be told, though he would never admit it, the tower was simply there, like a scar you no longer ask about. The sort of thing that feels too heavy to question. When Queen Morena died giving birth to her daughter, there was no wail of grief, only silence. Not even the midwife spoke of what she had seen in the birthing room. The king declared a fortnight of mourning, and then sealed off the chamber where she had passed. No one ever entered again. The child, Princess Elspeth, was pale as milk, and born with eyes the colour of stormwater. She rarely cried. Nurses said she often stared at things that weren't there, smiling softly, blinking slowly, like she was dreaming while awake. The king loved her, or perhaps, more accurately, the idea of her. He rarely touched her, rarely kissed her forehead, but he watched, always watched. As Elspeth grew, the fog seemed to settle more often. Flowers bloomed out of season. The ivy on the tower grew thicker. Something in the air changed. The people of Veilmoor said nothing. They simply lit their lanterns earlier in the day. By her 6th year, the princess no longer laughed, not out of sorrow, but something stranger. She would stop in the middle of the corridor, cock her head, and say, "They're humming again," to no one in particular, or, "The lady on the wall says not to touch the needles." The maids would shiver, the tutors would cross themselves. The nursemaids were replaced again and again. Eventually, the king decided to bring in a governess from across the sea, a woman of science and reason, unswayed by folklore. Her name was Miss Veil. She arrived dressed in grey, with a stern face and clever hands. "No ghosts," she told the staff flatly. "No foolishness. The girl simply has an active imagination. But Miss Vile didn't last. No one ever said why. On the last morning she was seen, her bed was empty, sheets soaked in ink, not blood, ink, thick and black, smelling of salt and mould. The only thing left behind was a broken pocket watch and a note scrawled in a language no one recognised. The king ordered her name never to be spoken again. When Elspeth turned 12, she began sleepwalking. At first, it was harmless. She would be found curled up beneath the dining table or standing by a window, eyes open but blank. But then the dreams began. She started speaking in her sleep, muttering things in voices that were not her own, deep voices, echoing voices, sometimes in tongues no one recognised. The castle priest attempted an exorcism once, though the king never approved it. The priest was found days later in the chapel crypt, blind and muttering. The spindle turns beneath the skin. After that, the king ordered the tower sealed entirely. Not even the birds could be seen circling it now. Elspeth grew more silent with each year. She did not age like other girls. Her hair remained silvery blonde, never darkening. Her skin stayed porcelain. She barely seemed to eat. Sometimes she would stare at a candle flame and whisper, "Not yet. She's not ready yet." No one knew who she was. And then came the 13th birthday. A hush fell across the land like a veil. The celebration was small, quiet. No outside kingdoms were invited. No nobles travelled to attend. It was said to be for security. In truth, it was because fear now wrapped itself around Veilmoor like ivy around the tower. Elspeth stood before her cake, a single white candle flickering at its centre, and when she blew it out, every flame in the castle went dark, every single one, from hearth to sconce to lantern. It was hours before they returned. After that day, the sleep became deeper. She began to vanish at night, only to be found again in the tower shadow, barefoot in the cold. She never said how she got there. Her lips would be stained with ink. The king finally summoned the Sisters of the Loom, an ancient order of seers thought to have vanished a century ago. They were said to know the patterns of fate, said to whisper to the spiders that wove the threads of reality. They arrived cloaked and hooded, eyes sewn shut with silver thread. They asked no questions, only sat at the foot of the princess's bed and wept. "She will sleep," they said in unison, "but not for peace. She will dream, and the dream will rot." The king begged them for answers, but all they gave was a riddle. When the spindle pierces flesh, the wound shall open a gate, and in sleep she will be the key. And with that they vanished. Now the king has forbidden all needles, all spindles, all sharp things in the castle. Seamstresses work only with thread and finger. Elspeth is watched constantly, never left alone. But at night, in the corners of the castle, where the moonlight does not reach, the shadows whisper still, because something is waiting, not just for her to sleep, but for us to forget what she really is. On the morning of Elspeth's 14th birthday, the castle was silent. The servants moved without speaking. No music played, no feast was planned. There were no trumpets, only the sound of boots on stone and the soft scratch of quills in the king's war chamber. The castle had become a place of stillness, as if movement itself might awaken something best left undisturbed. Elspeth rose from her bed without prompting. She no longer needed waking. Her eyes always opened at the same time. Dawn, when the first bird dared to sing outside her window. She dressed herself now, though her gowns were simpler. No corsets, no lace, only plain, soft fabrics that didn't snag, nothing sharp, not even a button. Her long hair was unbound today, falling like a river of spun gold down her back. It shimmered even in the grey light. She looked older than her years, and yet untouched by time somehow. There were no blemishes, no scars, no marks of growing up, just that same pale skin and those same storm-coloured eyes. She sat at the window, watching the fog roll in over the hills. "They're humming again," she whispered. A servant girl froze at the doorway. Her name was Mira, new, barely 17, brought in from a distant village that hadn't yet learned what the castle had become. She swallowed hard and stepped into the room, trying to appear brave. "Who's humming, Your Highness?" Elspeth turned her head slowly. "The women in the walls. They have needles now." Mira forced a smile. "There are no needles in the castle, Princess. The king saw to that." Elspeth blinked. "Then how do you explain the blood?" There was none, not that Mira could see, but Elspeth's gaze dropped to the girl's hand, and Mira looked down to find a thin red line tracing her thumb, a cut so small she hadn't even felt it. The room seemed colder. "I must have nicked it on something," Mira said quickly. "The embroidery hoop." "No one embroiders any more," Elspeth interrupted. "We dream instead." Mira stepped back toward the door, heart thudding. "You don't believe me yet," Elspeth said softly. "But you will. Everyone does, eventually." And then she smiled, not cruelly, not warmly, just distantly, like someone remembering a lullaby they hadn't meant to. That afternoon, the king summoned his court physician. Dr. Halveth was a gaunt man, with fingers like crow's legs, and a voice that rasped like dry leaves. He carried no sharp tools, only herbs, oils, and glass jars of things that should not have names. He had served the family for decades and asked no questions, not even when asked to prepare sleeping draughts thick enough to drop a man in moments. "She's grown quiet again," the king said, pacing before the hearth. "She watches things that aren't there, speaks riddles. I've forbidden mirrors. I've sealed the tower. I've ordered the chapel guarded. She is not possessed," the doctor said simply. "Nor is she sick." "Then what is she?" the king demanded, turning. A girl doesn't speak in dead languages one day, and vanish into locked rooms the next without some explanation. Halveth said nothing. Instead, he reached into his satchel and withdrew a folded cloth. Inside lay a single iron needle, dull, blunt-tipped, burned black at the base. "Where did you find this?" the king asked. "In her bed," Halveth said. "Under the pillow." The king stepped back, face pale. "But how? Something wants her to find it," Halveth murmured. "And she will, again and again. You can burn the tower, shatter the looms, banish every seamstress, but it will return. The story demands it." The king clenched his jaw. "Then we must end the story." But Halveth only looked at him with something close to pity. "No, your majesty, the story has already begun. You were simply too late to see the first stitch." That night, the dream came. Elspeth lay still in her bed, the canopy above her draped in velvet the colour of dusk. The moonlight filtered through the window, turning her silver hair into threads of starlight. Her eyes fluttered once, twice, and then opened, though she did not move. She rose without sound. Her feet touched the cold stone floor. She walked to the far wall, where a mirror once hung. Only a faint outline remained now, like a ghost in the shape of glass. She pressed her palm to the wall and whispered, "I'm ready." The stone gave way, not crumbled, not cracked. It simply folded back, like cloth being parted. Behind it, darkness waited, and something else, breathing, slow, wet. Elspeth stepped through. Mira had been unable to sleep. She often stayed awake now, candle in hand, pacing the corridor outside the princess's chambers. Something about Elspeth unsettled her, not in a cruel way, but in a deep, bone-level sense that the world had tilted slightly since she arrived, that things didn't move quite right in Veilmoor, that the walls remembered. When she saw the door ajar, she rushed forward. "Princess?" The room was empty. She turned, half expecting a voice behind her. None came. The candle flickered, then guttered. The flame died. She felt the cold like a wave, pressing against her back. Slowly, she turned and saw that the far wall was open. There was no hallway, no secret passage, just blackness stretching inward like a throat, and from within came the sound of a spindle turning, not wooden, not clumsy, iron, wet, slow, tick, turn, tick, turn. Mira stepped back. She did not scream, but she began to pray. Elsewhere, in the deepest wing of the castle, the tower remained locked, but the vines had returned, thick, thorned, twisting around the stone like veins beneath skin. They pulsed faintly, as if alive, and from within the highest window, a light glowed, faint, sickly, flickering like a dying lantern. Inside, the spindle waited, old, not forged but grown. Its tip glistened, it spun not with thread, but shadow, and somewhere, deeper still beneath the tower, a voice began to hum, soft, lulling, like a lullaby learned in the womb, like something sung by mouths that had no faces. The key is dreaming, the door is flesh, the girl is the gate, and sleep is only the beginning. The spindle turned. No one had touched it, not truly, not with their hands, but still it turned. Its iron tip glistened, not with oil, but with something thicker, the faintest smear of red along the edge, not fresh, not dry, but there. It sat in a room no longer listed on castle maps. The stone walls seemed to breathe with each tick of the wheel, and the shadows around it shifted, like they watched, like they remembered. Somewhere far above, Elspeth opened her eyes. She was not in her bed, not even in her chambers. She stood on cold flagstone, surrounded by walls she didn't recognise. The air smelled of damp wool and old iron. She wore a nightdress, thin and clinging, and she held something in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up. She looked down. A needle. Rust bloomed along its edge, like bloodstains on snow. She didn't move to drop it. She didn't move at all. Then, whispers, from the walls, from beneath the floor, from behind her eyelids. Spin the thread, bleed the line, stitch the heart, unwind, unwind, sss. Elspeth dropped the needle. It didn't clatter. It sank into the stone, into the shadow, as if the floor were only pretending to be solid. She backed away, but found the wall behind her pulsing, warm, like skin. Something behind it exhaled, slow and wet, and she felt it in her bones. She turned and ran. In the waking world, the king stood at the castle gates, his cloak heavy with dew, and his breath forming ghosts in the air. He watched as Halveth, the physician, dragged something up the hill, a sack bound in iron twine. Whatever lay inside moved, not by muscle, but by twitch, as though it were being tugged from within by strings. The guards didn't ask. From the river, Halveth said, breathing hard. It was floating upstream. The king glanced toward the sack. And you brought it here. It was coming either way, the doctor said, and unfastened the ties. What emerged was not a person, not entirely. It had once worn the robes of a priest, but they were soaked in dark water and moss. Its face was a blank mask of skin, featureless, pulsing. Its fingers were long and boneless, and it whispered, not words, names over and over, until it got to Elspeth. The king turned away. Burn it. We tried, Halveth murmured, twice. A pause. Then, it doesn't mind the fire. Mira did not return to the servants' quarters. Since the night she saw the wall open, she had moved to a small storage closet above the chapel, one with no windows, and a single wooden door she could bar from within. She kept her candle lit, even while she slept. But sleep rarely came. The castle had changed. It wasn't just the shadows, though they moved more now. It wasn't just the whispering, though it followed her, murmuring from drains and corners. It was the silence, the kind that fills a house before a storm, the kind that waits, holding its breath. She'd heard of the curse, of course, all the villages had, but Veilmoor had never seemed real, not until she lived inside it, not until she saw the princess standing in her own doorway, with blood under her nails, and no memory of how it got there. Mira had tried to warn someone. Once, the cook's assistant, Tommen, had laughed, called her dramatic. He went missing 3 nights later. His skin was found pressed flat between 2 pages of a book in the royal library, folded, preserved, still warm. Mira stopped talking after that. Elspeth's dreams grew deeper. She wandered endless corridors, where mirrors blinked, where rooms breathed, where beds whispered her name in children's voices, and stairwells turned inward, spiralling like conch shells. She walked through them calmly, her bare feet silent against the stone. Sometimes she passed other figures, men in crownless robes, women with mouths sewn shut, children dragging chains. They never looked at her, they only walked, and in the distance the spindle turned. It always turned, no matter how far she wandered. The sound never faded. It pulsed through her veins, louder with each step. Tick, turn, tick, turn, until one night she found the tower. It should not have existed. The room had no doors, no staircases, only a single window through which no light came. But the tower called to her in ways she didn't understand. She entered through the wall, not climbed, not opened, entered like sinking into sleep. And there it was, the spindle, waiting. The queen, Elspeth's mother, had not spoken for weeks. She sat in the garden that no longer grew, where the hedges withered and the roses wept rust. She held a handkerchief in her lap and stared at the same stone path where Elspeth had taken her first steps. She did not weep. The king stood behind her, unsure if she knew he was there. "She's still with us," he said finally, breathing, eating, smiling. The queen did not move. He sat beside her. It wasn't supposed to be like this. "She was born cursed," the queen whispered. He closed his eyes. "She never cried when she was born," the queen went on. "Do you remember? Not once. She only stared. And the midwife, she said the child looked at her and smiled." The king said nothing. "She's not our daughter anymore." In the dream, the spindle spoke, not with words, but with need. A pull behind Elspeth's ribs, a hunger she didn't recognize. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from longing. She reached toward it, but before her fingers touched the iron tip, a voice. No, it echoed through the tower, distant and hollow. "No, child, not yet." Elspeth turned. A woman stood there, not part of the dream, not part of the curse. Something older, cloaked in feathers. Her face was shadowed by a veil made of moth wings. "You are not ready," the woman said. "You have not earned your sleep." "I'm tired," Elspeth whispered. "Then rest, but do not give in." The tower shuddered. The spindle spun faster, and Elspeth woke screaming. In the physician's chambers, Halveth scribbled notes onto vellum that twitched beneath his quill. The script shifted when he looked away, rearranging into languages he could not speak. He burned the pages as fast as he could write them. He had studied curses his whole life, but this wasn't a curse. It was a contract, an agreement, written in blood, sealed in sleep, and someone, something, was collecting its due. He flipped back to the first page, a sketch of the castle, of its many sealed rooms and false corridors, and in the centre, a spiral, not a map, a lock, and the girl, he realised, was the key. The palace maids refused to clean the east wing. One girl claimed the corridor changed behind her, doors multiplying, hallways stretching like pulled taffy. Another swore she passed her own reflection, not in a mirror, but walking beside her. One maid never came back at all. They found her shoes in front of a sealed door that hadn't opened in generations. One shoe was still warm, the other had blood pooled at the toe, with a single strand of golden hair trapped beneath the strap. None of the maids had golden hair. The king quietly ordered the wing locked again, but in the nights that followed, guests would wake to see flickering candlelight at the end of the hallway. No sound, just the light, distant, pulsing, like a heartbeat. Elspeth walked with a mirror in her hand. She did not remember finding it, but she woke with it lying on her chest, cold and heavy. It was small, framed in tarnished silver, with a crack down the middle that split her reflection in two. Half of her face looked wrong, lips curled up in a secret smile. She wasn't smiling, eyes too wide, too white. When she tried to set it down, her fingers locked around the handle. She wandered the garden with it. The trees leaned away as she passed. The birds no longer sang. In the cracked half of the mirror, her surroundings looked different. The roses were black, the sky was violet, and something followed her, tall and thin, with limbs like willow branches, and a face full of needle teeth. It walked just behind her in the mirror, never visible when she turned around. She stopped walking, so did it. She whispered, "What are you?" The mirror didn't answer, but the thing smiled wider. In the kitchen, the cook's cat gave birth to a litter of kittens, 10 in total. 9 were normal, 1 was not. It had no eyes, no mouth. Its skin was translucent, showing a flickering shadow moving inside its tiny chest. It didn't mew. It whispered only one word, soon. The cook drowned it in a barrel of salt water. The other kittens never made a sound again. The night Elspeth began to sleepwalk, the nursemaid saw her cross the great hall, barefoot, and half asleep, her white nightdress trailing behind her like smoke. "Princess," she whispered. Elspeth didn't respond. The nursemaid followed. She followed her up the spiral stair, past the locked doors, and into the western tower, sealed for centuries after the fire. The door opened for Elspeth. The inside was not charred. It was clean, pristine. The room inside was a child's nursery, untouched by time. A single cradle sat in the centre. Elspeth stepped inside. The nursemaid did not. She heard singing, soft, low, and impossible. It was the lullaby Elspeth's mother had sung to her as a baby. But the voice was wrong. Too many harmonies, too many mouths, and it didn't stop. The song continued, even after the nursemaid shut the door and ran. Prince Corwin arrived from the neighbouring realm 3 days later, handsome, courteous, raised on tales of curses and romance. He believed he could break whatever spell loomed over Veilmoor. He met Elspeth in the great garden under grey skies. She greeted him with a smile too sharp for her soft voice. Her eyes flicked from his face to his shadow, and she frowned. "What happened to the last one?" she asked. "Last what?" She turned to the dead rose bushes. "The last prince." Corwin laughed nervously. "There hasn't been another." But Elspeth only whispered, "That's what they always say." She handed him the mirror. "Tell me what you see." He held it up and blanched. His reflection wasn't his own. It was him, but old, rotting, with hollow eyes and a crown of brambles. Behind him stood a woman of glass, holding a spindle made of bone. Elspeth smiled. "I think you'll do." The king met with Halveth again that night. The physician brought maps, charts, books bound in flesh, all traced to the prophecy that cursed Elspeth at birth. It was never a single witch, Halveth explained. That was a simplification. The king paled. Then who? Not a who, a when. He opened a scroll so long it coiled like a serpent. There have been many Elspeths, many Veilmoors, all tied together. The wheel spins, the girl sleeps, the kingdom falls, over and over. The king stared. "How do we stop it?" Halveth's hands trembled. "We don't. We were never meant to. This is a ritual, and it's not finished." That night, Elspeth kissed Prince Corwin. She didn't love him, but she wanted to see what would happen. The kiss burned. His mouth tasted of violets and iron. His hands gripped hers too tightly, but she didn't pull away. She leaned in, deeper, until she felt his heartbeat in her teeth. When she stepped back, his eyes were glass. He crumpled like wet paper. The mirror fell from her pocket and shattered on the stone. The thing behind her smiled. Elspeth looked down at Corwin's body and laughed. In the nursery tower, the cradle rocked. No wind, no hands, just the lullaby, still playing, still waiting. She walked the garden paths again, barefoot, trailing her fingers over dying hedges. The roses had turned grey. The crows no longer circled the spires. They perched on them, watching. The queen came to her chamber on the third night. "Elspeth," she whispered, "what did you see?" Elspeth sat on the windowsill, staring at the clouds. She touched her lips, gently, like something had been stitched there. "Nothing," she said, "but I felt it, and it felt me back." The king sealed off the garden. Halveth asked him, "Do you think that will help?" "I don't care," the king replied. "I need something to do." Halveth sighed. "There are tales," he offered, "of a place in the forest, a black tree older than the kingdom, said to bleed red sap if wounded, and whisper names in the voice of lost children." The king gave him a look. "And what do we do with it? Set it on fire?" "No," Halveth murmured. "We ask it how to lose a daughter before the curse takes her soul." In the courtyard, a goat gave birth to a child. Not a kid, a child. It had the body of a goat, but the face of a young boy. It screamed with a voice that shook the glass windows, and when the stable hands approached, it told them things, secrets no one should know, private griefs, forgotten sins, names of the dead. The stable hands buried it beneath the northern wall. By morning, the grave was empty. Elspeth dreamed of spinning wheels, not one, many, a circle of them, turning in the dark, all attached to long threads that led into the mouths of sleeping women. Each wheel turned slowly, pulling the thread taut, tighter and tighter. She woke with blood on her fingertips, not hers. The kingdom began to fade, not rot, not collapse, fade. Houses stood empty by morning, with no sign of departure, no luggage, no carts, no broken locks, just absence. Chairs left mid-meal, teacups cooling beside open books. Guards posted at the castle gates would vanish in mid-step, their armour clattering to the stone in piles. And still the lullaby played. It could be heard in the courtyard fountain, in the drip of water on stone, in the breath between heartbeats, always the same. Close your eyes and count to 10. When you wake, it starts again. Elspeth stood before the sealed door in the east wing. No one had opened it since the maid vanished. It was bound with chains of iron and salt, but she heard something inside. Not movement, not breathing, spinning. She placed her hand on the lock. It fell open with a soft click. Inside, the room was empty. No furniture, no dust, just a single beam of moonlight illuminating the centre of the floor. And there, floating 6 inches above the stone, was a spindle. It turned on its own, slowly, as if guided by unseen fingers. Elspeth stepped toward it. From the shadows, something moved. "Not yet," said a voice like crushed glass. She froze. A woman stepped forward, tall, robed in ash-coloured silk, her face hidden behind a veil made of moth wings. "You are not ready," she said. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her head slightly. I was the last Elspeth. Elspeth's dreams grew worse. Now the castle was buried in sand. The sky had no sun, and a tree grew from her stomach, its roots curling through her veins, its branches cracking through her skin. Hanging from the branches were masks, each one her face, twisted into different expressions: joy, rage, sorrow, madness. The spinning wheels spun faster. A baby cried in the dark, and something whispered, "Sleep is a womb, but not all children survive it." The queen grew ill. She began to speak in tongues, her lips moving with words no one understood, her eyes clouded with smoke. At night, she tried to crawl into the fireplace, whispering, "He's in the chimney. I see him." The king ordered Halveth to sedate her, but when he did, her body bled dust, not blood, dust, and something inside her laughed. Elspeth returned to the room. The spindle was still there. So was the veiled woman. "You remember, don't you?" the woman asked. Elspeth shook her head. "No, but your blood does. It's the same story, the same girl, the same dream." Elspeth stepped closer. "What happens if I touch it?" The woman tilted her head. "You fall asleep, and everything else wakes up." Elspeth stared at her. "Then what happens?" The woman smiled. "You become the story. The queen died at midnight. Only it wasn't death. Her body cracked open like a porcelain shell. Hollow. No organs. No bones. Just soot and flower petals inside her chest, falling to the bed in slow spirals." Elspeth watched from the doorway. "She was the first," said the veiled woman. She stood beside Elspeth, her presence casting no shadow. The roots had to take hold somewhere. Elspeth didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply turned and walked back to the east wing. The castle no longer obeyed its own walls. Doors led to places they hadn't before. A servant walked into the pantry and found herself in a fog-covered forest where the trees whispered her father's name. She never returned. Another climbed the stairwell and emerged in the old throne room, except it was upside down, and the chandeliers dripped water like stalactites. She did not scream, but her hair turned white. Elspeth found her in the morning, curled in a cabinet, humming the lullaby in reverse. The people of the kingdom began to forget. They forgot their own names, their own children. Even time slipped. One nobleman claimed he'd only been at court a week, when in truth he had served for 40 years. His beard was long and white. He didn't recognize his own reflection. When Halveth showed him a mirror, the nobleman tore out his eyes with his fingers, crying, "That man is wearing my skin." He died before sunset. In the garden, the roses grew teeth, not metaphorically, real, pale teeth, where thorns should be. One of the cooks tried to clip a bloom for the princess's chamber. The petals fluttered, the stem hissed, then it bit off 3 of his fingers. When the king came to see the damage, the roses whispered to him in his daughter's voice, He sealed the garden again, this time with fire, but nothing burned. Elspeth began to sleepwalk. They found her at dawn in the abandoned nursery, curled in the old cradle. Her mouth was filled with thread, long silver strands pulled from nowhere. When Halveth tried to remove them, she bit him and laughed, but not in her voice. "Why does it choose girls?" she asked the veiled woman one night. They stood in the east wing again, the spinning spindle, still floating, still turning. "Because you remember," the woman said. "Boys forget too quickly. They build cities and wars to distract themselves. Girls, we keep the thread." Elspeth touched the spindle. It shivered under her hand, warm and wet. "Will it hurt?" "Yes." She didn't pull away. The king slept for 7 days. When he woke, his crown had fused to his head. Skin had grown over the metal, laced with tiny golden veins. He said nothing of his dreams, only that he saw a cradle floating in a river of ink, and every time he reached for it, something pulled him back. Elspeth stopped casting a reflection. She would stand in front of the mirror for hours, staring into the void where her face should be, but something else was always watching from inside it. One night she asked it, "Do I die?" It wrote in frost along the glass, "You already did." In the village, time collapsed entirely. Children were born and aged to dust in a single hour. The church bell tolled by itself, over and over, even after being pulled down and smashed. The priest locked himself in the crypt and carved the lullaby into the stone with his teeth. When they opened the door, he was gone. Only the words remained. "Close your eyes and count to 10. When you wake, it starts again." Elspeth no longer walked. She drifted. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She spoke less and less, but when she did, birds dropped dead from the sky. One morning, she told Halveth, "The curse isn't on me, it's through me." He didn't understand. She didn't explain. The king ordered the spindle destroyed. He brought blacksmiths, priests, even witches to shatter it. They could not touch it. Their hands passed through it as if through fog until it chose to bite. Then their skin melted like wax. The spindle spun faster after each attempt, and from somewhere beneath the castle, the lullaby played louder. The veiled woman came to Elspeth again. "This is the final year," she said. "You're nearly 16. Elspeth nodded. "I want to see it," she said. The place in the dream. The woman offered her hand, and for the first time, Elspeth took it. They walked through the castle, but it was not the castle. The stones were soft. The air was wet, as if breathed by something sleeping just below. They came to a tower that spiraled down instead of up. The veiled woman led her down the endless steps. At the bottom was a door. Carved into it were hundreds of faces, sleeping, smiling, crying, screaming. The veiled woman touched the door. It opened. Inside was a bed. And on that bed was Elspeth, asleep, young, innocent, perfect. Elspeth stepped closer. The girl's eyes opened, black, empty, and the voice that came from her mouth said, "Welcome back." Elspeth stood before herself. The girl on the bed was not her twin, not a reflection, not even a future. She was something else, older in silence, younger in danger. When she blinked, the sound was like knives being sheathed. Elspeth tried to speak. The girl beat her to it. "You brought me back too soon," she said. "It's not finished yet." "What isn't?" Elspeth whispered. The girl smiled. "You." The room smelled like wilted roses and grave dust. The veiled woman had vanished. Or maybe she'd never been there. The girl sat up slowly, each vertebra cracking like breaking ice. "I waited for centuries," she said. "I waited in every girl who dreamed too deep, but they woke too quickly. You're the first who came back willingly." Elspeth's mouth was dry. "I'm not here to join you." The girl stood. "You already have." They moved in unison, not mirrored, but threaded. Every breath the girl took tugged at something inside Elspeth, as if her lungs were stitched to hers by invisible thread. Elspeth stumbled back. "You're the curse." "No," said the girl. "I'm the door it walks through." The walls of the room pulsed, like lungs inhaling. The bed bled around the edges, and the girl leaned forward, her eyes bottomless. "Come back to bed." Elspeth turned and ran, but the stairs spiraled upward now, endlessly, breathlessly. Her feet never touched stone. She floated, fell forward, and never down. Behind her, the lullaby whispered, "Prick your finger, don't be shy." Her ears rang, her fingers tingled, and just as she reached the top, she awoke. In her own bed, slick with sweat, eyes wide. But the world was wrong. The mirror was gone. Her door was gone. Only the spindle remained, hovering in the corner of her room, spinning. Halveth barged in moments later, panting. "Elspeth, the Queen, she..." He stopped, his eyes locked on the spindle. It hovered beside her now, impossibly close. He didn't ask how it got there. He didn't need to. Instead, he knelt beside her and whispered, "You've seen her, haven't you?" Elspeth didn't nod. She didn't need to. The tears running down her cheeks spoke for her. The castle was unravelling. The stone bled moss. The paintings wept wax. The air reeked of old lavender and something much older. Iron, mildew, decay. The clocks ran backward. Time looped in strange ways. In the library, pages turned themselves, always to the same sentence. The sleeper wakes the world, and then again, and again, until the ink bled through. In the village, people began sleepwalking en masse. They rose at midnight, walked into the forest, and stood among the trees, waiting. Some were barefoot, some were nude. All were humming the lullaby. No one could wake them, and those who tried, they joined them. The king sealed the castle gates. The courtiers begged to leave, but the exits were gone. Windows looked out into nothing. Doors opened onto stone walls. One knight threw himself from a balcony and landed in the castle's main hall, broken and silent, mouth agape. He was still smiling. Elspeth stopped speaking, not out of choice. Her words no longer worked. When she opened her mouth, the lullaby came out. When she tried to scream, the spindle spun faster. Halveth found her in the sewing room one evening, surrounded by dolls. All of them were stitched to look like her. One was missing a mouth. Elspeth was holding the needle, and her lips were bleeding. The veiled woman returned, not in the castle, but in the mirror, fogging the glass with each word. "You're almost ready," she whispered. "The dream is thinning. Soon you'll walk it while awake." Elspeth wrote her question with chalk on the wall. "What happens when I do?" The woman smiled with teeth of bone. "You'll meet the one who sleeps beneath everything." The court mage, desperate for answers, ventured into the dungeons with his grimoires. He drew ancient circles, chanted words forbidden in every tongue, and what answered him was not a demon. It was her voice, from the shadows, calling his name in lullaby. He turned to run, but the shadows were soft, like pillows, like sleep. When they found him, his skull had been hollowed out and filled with rose petals. They spelled her name, Elspeth. The kingdom's map changed overnight. Villages vanished, forests moved, rivers curved toward the castle, as if everything wanted to converge on her. On the 16th night, before her birthday, the moon turned black, the birds stopped flying, and a single tower appeared where none had been before, higher than the rest, made of obsidian and glass. It hummed with the sound of turning thread. Elspeth stood before it the next day. She was barefoot, wrapped in a nightgown soaked in rosewater and shadow. Halveth followed her only to the first step. "I can't go with you," he said. Elspeth looked back, her eyes now deep blue, not just in colour, but in depth, like they had no bottom. "I know," she whispered. The tower's steps were endless, but she never tired, never slowed. Each step whispered, each stone sang. By the time she reached the top, her heart was no longer beating. It was spinning. There, in the highest room, stood a bed, not hers, but meant for her. Its posts were needles, its sheets woven from hair. Its canopy was a web of silk threaded with eyes. The spindle hovered above the pillow, waiting, and seated on the bed was the girl again, smiling. "Time to sleep," she said. Elspeth approached the spindle. She didn't hesitate. She raised her finger. The girl took her hand, guiding it forward. Just before contact, Elspeth looked up and asked, "Will it end?" The girl tilted her head. "There is no end, only deeper dreams." And with that, Elspeth pricked her finger. The world sighed, the castle exhaled, and everything turned black. They left the tower. They thought they had won. Elspeth was alive. Halveth was at her side. The castle had gone quiet, vines retracting, windows closing like eyelids, shutting in whatever had been watching. The kingdom began to breathe again. Candles were lit, church bells rang. The curse was broken, they said, but the people whispered prayers too quickly. They locked their doors at sundown. They crossed themselves when Elspeth passed by, because something about her had not come back. Something had stayed. Elspeth didn't dream. She remembered. Each night she lay still in her bed, staring at the ceiling, eyes open, though none could see. And in the morning, when asked how she slept, she would always smile and say, "I didn't sleep at all." But Halveth knew. He watched her mouth move in the night, whispers, repetitions, rhythms that matched the hum of the spindle. Once, he placed his ear near her lips and heard a name not meant for waking ears. He bled from his nose for hours after. The castle had not died. It had simply replanted itself. Vines sprouted in the countryside, withering crops. Wells turned to mirrors at midnight, showing strangers in the water. Children refused to sleep. Some wandered into the woods and were never seen again. And beneath the kingdom, in a crypt with no records, a single spindle spun on its own, balanced on a cracked throne of glass. Halveth begged Elspeth to leave the kingdom with him. "Let's disappear," he said. "Let the castle sink behind us." But Elspeth only tilted her head. "Why would I leave?" she asked, voice soft. "This is my garden now." She didn't smile. She blossomed. The dream had not ended. It had moved, and it moved with her. Wherever Elspeth walked, people stared too long. Their reflections twitched behind mirrors. They saw her standing still in places she hadn't passed. The air around her shimmered like heat off pavement, even in winter. And in the deepest hours of night, the town heard music. A lullaby played backward. The queen tried to have her banished. The guards sent to arrest her were never seen again, except for their shadows. They appeared on castle walls, at sunrise miming panic, reaching for help they'd never find. The king fell ill soon after, and the throne remained untouched. Elspeth never claimed it. She didn't need to. The kingdom already dreamed in her name. One day, Halveth awoke to find her standing at the edge of their bed, eyes closed. Her hand dripped blood. She held a new spindle, black, humming, alive. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. She smiled faintly. "I didn't get it," she said. "It found me." And then she opened her eyes. They were mirrors, and he saw himself in them. Only he wasn't breathing. He fled that night, ran into the hills, into the cold. He found a chapel, the old kind, built from salt and bones. There he confessed to a priest who had no tongue. The man wept and handed him a candle carved with runes. "Burn this," the priest rasped. "At the base of the tower, it will close the gate." "What gate?" But the priest was already dead. Halveth returned, alone. He climbed the spiral staircase to the room where it had all begun. The air was thick, the walls pulsed. Elspeth stood in the centre, arms outstretched, hair floating, the air rippling around her like water. The bed was gone. In its place, a spiral of mirrors. At the centre, a hole, black, endless, breathing. "I have to close it," he whispered, lifting the candle. She looked at him. Something flickered in her. Recognition, pain, sorrow, then hunger. "You loved me once," she said. "I still do." "Then burn it." He touched flame to wax. The candle screamed. The tower shook. The hole in the floor wailed. Shrieking winds of every voice Elspeth had ever dreamed. The mirrors shattered inward. Blood rained up. And then darkness. When Halveth opened his eyes, he was alone. The tower was empty. No vines, no throne, no bed, no Elspeth. He fell to his knees, but he did not cry. She was not gone. She was simply everywhere. The curse did not end. It grew patient. It no longer needed a tower. Now it waited in lullabies, in nursery rhymes, in the pause between thoughts, when you're just about to drift off. You think you're safe. You think the dream ends when you wake, but it doesn't, because Sleeping Beauty never woke up. She just got better at dreaming, and now, so will you.